Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to welcome you today to today's webinar event. It's called Commissioning and Delivering Person-Centred and Person-Led Services. My name's Katy and I'm the Community Programme Lead at Fulfilling Lives, Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham. And I'm joined today by Steve from CRESR, Suzy, Lucy and Sarah from Groundswell, Ian from Leeds City Council and Helena from Fulfilling Lives LSL, who we'll hear from shortly. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to give a short introduction before handing over to our research partners, research and learning partners at MPC, Groundswell and CRESR. But before that, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are reaching you today via Zoom webinar, and this means your cameras and microphones are automatically turned off. However, do please use the chat function and interact with us and other participants in the room. We know that others will have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share, and today is about learning from everyone, not just those presenting. We'd love everyone to add their name and location into the chat box just to say hello, so please do so if you haven't already. And make sure you select to panelists and attendees so we can all see what each other are saying. You can submit questions to the presenters and panel via the Q&A icon, which should be at the bottom of your screen. This is encouraged, and please do ask questions. We'll be taking as many questions as possible, and our presenters may well have some questions for you too. We are recording the session. The recording will be available afterwards to ensure that any who couldn't make the event this morning can still access what is shared. If you're a Twitterer, please do tweet along. The Twitter handles and our hashtag will pop up in the chat now, so you've got access to them. We'll share links to some of our reports in the chat, but please do share the links to your organisations or any resources that you think others might benefit from. This is a learning space for all of us. We will also be sharing the slides and a summary of all the links in a follow-up email after the event. So, Fulfilling Lives, Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham. We're funded by the National Lottery Community Fund and are part of the National Fulfilling Lives programme focusing on multiple disadvantage. 12 area partnerships across England were funded to test new ways of ensuring individuals receive joined up and person-led services which work for them. We are privileged to be one of those funded programmes. Our aim is to change the lives of people experiencing multiple disadvantage for the better now and in the future. Give equal value to the voices of both the decision makers and the people we support so that all opinions are heard and respected equally, and to make an impact on the way individuals are supported by influencing policy and practice both locally and nationally. At Fulfilling Lives, Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham, our programme has three main areas of work to help us achieve these aims. Service delivery. The programme has delivered an outreach service providing person-led holistic support to people experiencing multiple disadvantage across Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham. Co-production. We focus on co-production, working to give equal voice to people experiencing multiple disadvantage, and system change. We provide learning and evidence that will be used to influence on a local and national level, creating sustainable, long-term systemic change for people facing multiple disadvantage. We acknowledge that the system doesn't work for everyone, particularly people who experience greater levels of disadvantage. In order to improve the lives of people experiencing multiple disadvantage, we believe the system needs to change. This requires a shift in thinking, moving away from a focus on an individual as the problem to a focus on the system. If you are interested in finding out more about our system change priorities, then check out our website. Today's session will be led by our research and learning partners. The partnership involves Fulfilling Lives LSL, NPC, Groundswell and CRESR, the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research at Sheffield Hallam University. The partnership was commissioned by Fulfilling Lives LSL in 2020 to strengthen the evidence around barriers and what works for people experiencing multiple disadvantage. A key learning from the programme is the importance of relationship building when supporting people. As someone who has lived experience of using services and as a former Fulfilling Lives link worker, I fully recognise this to be true. At Fulfilling Lives, we work in a person-led way. Our aim when we meet someone is to get to know them, understand their situation from their perspective and build trust. We have the flexibility of time, meeting people where they are and having no preconceived ideas on the direction the support should take. We navigate the system alongside the people we support, observing how the system is behaving and not just the person's reaction to it. We focus on building relationships that rebalance the power dynamic between a person receiving support and the one who is giving it. By working in this way, people feel empowered to make informed decisions about their lives. To be person-led means adopting a different mindset and commissioning style. The National Lottery Community Fund have commissioned the Fulfilling Lives programme in a way which is much less risk adverse. There is trust alongside accountability, and results are not measured on traditional outcomes and set timeframes. But enough from me. I'm going to turn my camera off now, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Steve Green, Senior Research Fellow at CRESR. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks ever so much, Katy. That's great. Very pleased to be here, and good morning, everybody. Next slide, please. Great. So in terms of what we're going to do today, I'm going to briefly introduce the sort of concept around relational outcomes and what we want to talk about. Just put that in the context of some key findings from the work that we've been doing in the research and learning partnership alongside Fulfilling Lives and with NPC and with Groundswell. And then after that, we're going to get some perspectives from several people, from an expert by experience, Sarah, from a commissioner, Ian Street, and also from some service providers as well. And also, very importantly, from Fulfilling Lives themselves and the work they've been doing around this. And then we're going to finish with a Q&A. So let's hope that that all goes to plan. So next slide, please. Okay, so from the work that we've been doing in the learning partnership over the last couple of years, something that came out very strongly from our sort of analysis of systems throughout the 3 boroughs was that different ways of working were required, and that also different ways of working were being successful with those experiencing multiple disadvantage. And as a result of that, there's a lot of things to do. There's different ways of working. There's different ways of commissioning. There's different ways of providing services. We've wrote a couple of reports which are on the Fulfilling Lives website, which I would invite you to go and have a look at if you've not already. One of my colleagues, I'm sure, will put a link to the website and to those reports in the chat for us. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the conundrums around all this is actually defining the kind of outcomes that we are wanting to achieve in the help and support that we're providing to those experiencing multiple disadvantage. Traditionally, commissioning and services have worked to regimes which are trying to meet very sort of what we might call hard outcomes. Those things that are tangible, objective, can be easily observed in a given time frame, such as sustaining a tenancy for a set period of time, maintaining paid employment for 6 months, those kind of things. From a researcher's point of view, those are the things that, you know, we set as like gold standards, things that we can measure easily, provided we have the right data. There's also a whole range of soft and what we might call relational outcomes as well. Important for reflecting changes in the perceptions, in the feelings, the attitudes, the interpersonal skills of people. Really important, the relationships, the trust, and the behaviours of people we're supporting. And there's many, many reasons and a growing literature and growing evidence for why they are really important. Next slide, please. So just to explain those kind of things and why it's so important. So what we're talking about is overcoming multiple disadvantage. And I think what we're saying, what the evidence is pointing us to, and what's actually happening to great success in many areas, is taking relational approaches, trying to develop better trust, better relationships between workers, between services, and the people that they are trying to support. It requires a lot of things to make it successful. It requires a great deal of flexibility. We're talking about people who may have been around the system, may have been denied services, may have struggled to access services for a long, long time, are dealing with with layer upon layer of multiple disadvantage, are dealing with failure, and very often dealing with very deep-seated trauma at any particular time. And of course that varies and goes up and down. So we need services that provide the kind of flexibility that copes with that. We also need elements of co-production. We need to understand that in order to meet the needs of people, we need to understand what their needs might be and what their priorities are. We need to give them agency, some power, some choice in order to do that together. Not only to learn how to use those, learn how those services should be developed, but on an individual level as well. We require some co-production. Partnership is all important. We know the trauma and the risk of re-traumatizing people who have to tell their story again and again and again to different multiple agencies, and all at the same time those agencies not talking to each other and the stories getting mixed up. So effective partnerships and coordination is just so important. And also I think we need to think more about long-term support for people. Traditional services may operate in time-limited ways that really don't reflect the needs of people. They don't reflect the needs of individual recovery journeys. And then all around this, of course, is these are all sorts of ways to make a broken system work better in terms of working effectively. But we need to also affect certain system change and recognize where parts of the system are failing people experiencing multiple disadvantage, how we can change that for the better. Next slide, please. So when we do all of that, it requires a different set of outcomes. And we need to change the way, the philosophy, the concepts, the way that we think about outcomes. So progression for people experiencing multiple disadvantage, it's incremental, it's non-linear, it goes up and down, it's long-term, it's arbitrary, it's difficult to assess. Even when people reach a very positive level in their recovery. Is that it? Is that it? Do they require some more support beyond that and whatnot? So we have to think about this in very different ways if we're going to reach our long-term expectations. Soft and relational outcomes, especially important in the early stages. So what we might term sort of small steps or incremental steps on a journey are actually very, very important for people who've lost trust in the system, who've lost hope that anything will help them, that have been angered by services in the past, that have been angered by their own situation for whatever reason. The kind of incremental stages, an example might be somebody who agrees to put their head around the door of a support group. Or something like that, you know, that is actually quite a major step. And also, I think we need to recognize that to get to that stage might have required weeks and weeks of work from a dedicated member of staff of a particular service who's had to do an awful lot of work to get to that stage. And we need a way of sort of recognizing those things. Next slide, please. So how do we reframe the approach? You know, there's various ways and lots of things that we need to do to go around doing that. We need to think about the support that is provided. We need to think about it being individualized. We need to think about it being co-created with those experiencing multiple disadvantage. We need it to be informed. We need a good understanding of who we're trying to help and what help people require. We need to change the philosophy too. We need to recognize people's strengths more. There's a lot of really good work going on in this field now, but I think that is something that we can sort of roll out more. People are not lost causes. People are in difficult situations, and we can bring out strengths in anybody and everybody. That should be the goal anyway. We should make services that stop placing value judgments on people. There's been a lot of work going on about taking really non-judgmental approaches. I've been lucky enough to be working with quite a few projects across the country who are doing just this. And it really is awe-inspiring to see the way that workers work with people and don't make value judgments and respect people's choices and the things that happen to them. And if things go wrong, start again. And things like that. I think that non-conditional approach is just so important. In terms of timeframes as well, open-ended support, accepting the ups and downs, the continuity of support. I recognise how difficult that is from a funding point of view. But nevertheless, I think it's something that we should consider. And then, of course, in terms of measuring, you know, jointly determined outcomes. So are we asking people themselves, what kind of outcomes, what would you like to achieve? You know, how does that fit in? How does that fit in with our service design? Can we do it that way? We reframe those indicators of progress to recognize that those very tiny steps, as we might perceive them, are actually very, very important and hard-earned steps. And I think we need to value the impact of that relationship building, the value of developing and extending trust to people. Once again, as part of the recovery process. Next slide, please, Marjorie. So I know I'm running out of time, and we're on a very, very tight schedule. These are a few of the views heard from people. I'm not going to read them out, but hopefully you've got time to look through those. And I'll leave it there. I'm hoping that the slide pack might be distributed to people. If not, we can certainly do these. But what we want to get across in our research, and it comes through in the report as well, is that people have very, very interesting things to say. And when you sit down and you talk to people who've had experiences of multiple disadvantage, you learn an awful lot from them if you listen well. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we think is required, I've really boiled it down to sort of 3 areas. I think, first of all, sort of building those soft outcomes, building those relational outcomes into commissioning frameworks is a real challenge, but I think it's something that's so important. If we're going to change the way we work, let's change, see, that's my timer going off. With that, we change the, if we're going to change the way we work, let's change the way that we commission, let's change the way that we actually set outcomes for people and how we think about what success looks like. Let's promote person-led practice, supported by sort of more thoughtful outcomes, I think is sort of secondary to that. You know, let's really promote services that create that relational approach with people. And then lastly, I think invest in a very meaningful co-production. So let's not forget to embark in co-producing the design of services, the design of commissioning, and on that individual level, the kind of outcomes we want to do with the people that we are trying to support. I think that's it from me. So thank you very much. I hope that wasn't too quick. And I think Suzy's going to hand us over.
Hi everybody, hopefully you can hear me all right. Thank you, Steve, for that really interesting presentation and for setting the scene for us today. So my name's Suzy, I'm a research manager at Groundswell, and I have a fantastic job of chairing the panel and the Q&A today. So we can see our panelists here, you can give us a wave. There they are. So we have some wonderful panelists here who are going to talk about commissioning, person-centred and led approaches, and what this means for measuring and setting outcomes. They all bring a range of perspectives, and I'm sure that's going to make a really interesting discussion. So what I'm going to do now is introduce all the panelists, and then they'll each have an opportunity to talk for about 4 or 5 minutes about their thoughts on the topic. And then I'll ask some questions, and then we'll invite you, the audience, to ask them some questions as well. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Ian Street, who's a commissioning manager in the Adults and Health Directorate at Leeds City Council. He works in a team that commissions and manages contracts for vulnerable adults. So that means people sleeping rough, drug and alcohol services, offender management, domestic violence and abuse. We've got Lucy Holmes, who joined Groundswell very recently as Creating Change Director from Alcohol Change UK. Lucy's going to share some of her thoughts, particularly around about measuring outcomes, as Lucy works in research. And we've got Helena Henriques, who's a quality and development partner at Fulfilling Lives Lambeth, Suffolk and Lewisham. She oversees different areas of the Fulfilling Lives programme, looking at quality and how they can do things better. And last but no means least, we've got Sarah Hough, who's a research officer at Groundswell, who previously worked in the youth sector and leaving care teams. And Sarah is going to talk about her experience of being a client in services, but also as a professional. So first of all, I'd like Ian Street to give a few thoughts and reflections on the topic from a commissioner's perspective, and then we'll move to Lucy, Helena, and then Sarah. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Suzy, and hi, everybody. Yeah, I was quite relieved, actually. I've not seen Steve's presentation, so I was looking at all his little mind map, and I thought, oh, we're not doing too badly if I judge myself against some of those. I guess we had a Fulfilling Lives project in Leeds, and that has helped us sort of influence what we're doing a little bit and how we commission and how we work. But it also was quite key because it came online at a time when we were rethinking a lot of this stuff anyway, and thinking about how do we change, what do we do? So I think broadly for us, I've got to keep this brief on my 5 minutes. So broadly for us, I mean, the starting point is we do have an overarching strategic vision in the city. And I think that can sound a bit trite at times, but it is actually quite important for us. So, we want Leeds to be the best city to live in, ambitious, but what does that mean for all the people who live here? That's going to be different for everybody. But we also want Leeds to be a compassionate city, and we want people to fulfill their potential. So having those things spelled out right at the top from the politicians is important and gives us a little bit of framework from which we can work from. We've got an invest to save model, so we've managed to maintain quite a lot of investment into our frontline services, despite the pressure we've been under from the cuts that we faced in Leeds. I think key for us, which is one of Steve's blobs, was longer contracts. So we've been moving for over a period of years to having much longer contracts in place. So, for example, the typical length of contract now for our services is around 8 years. So that's good. I've just done a street outreach contract which goes live on 1st of April, and that's an 8-year contract. So our drug and alcohol services 8 years. Most of our housing pathway services, are 8 years. So that's what we've moved towards. We have really looked at sort of our specifications and tried to make sure that we recognise the need of to support people who experience multiple disadvantage. So we spell that out, that there's an expectation on the providers to do that, but also then think about building in specific elements within there, whether that's navigator support that came out of the Fulfilling Lives project, or complex needs teams, or what does that look like? But try and spell that out. Don't always have hard targets. So our outreach contract, I don't think has any hard targets in it at all, as an example of that. Building flexibility, which again I think was on Steve's thing. So, and what I mean by that is, excuse me, discussion and change. What's the overarching aim of what we're trying to do, and then trusting the provider to do that, and standing back, not micromanaging. Allow the provider to change and adapt and to meet this. And there's lots of things they've done that providers have come and said, we'd like to embed a worker in a different agency. That would never happen before, but that happens now. So you've got that cross sort of pollination of skills and experience and that sort of side of things. Relationships, for me, obviously, I don't have many relationships very often with people who are experiencing the issues, but although that does happen through some lived experience panels and things like that, but for me, it's about the experience and our relationship with providers. And that is absolutely the fundamental thing behind all of this. You've got to have a good relationship with your provider. It's definitely we, not them and us. So, we listen and respond. So we're developing a new women's housing pathway in Leeds, and that's come out directly from providers saying to us, there's a need around this. So how can we address that? Multi-agency working sounds, again, easy, but it's absolutely critical in terms of what we're doing in Leeds. No one provider has all the answers. No one worker has all the answers. We've got to work together around that. We've got, for example, on rural sleeping side, we've got a strategic umbrella called the Leeds Street Support Partnership, which brings all those agencies and commissioners and people together to look at what we're doing around that. there's something that I would call commissioning through influence. So that's like, you know, influencing politicians. We'll probably come on to that, but we really work in a political environment. We can't forget that. How to influence procurement. So procurement aren't very keen on soft outcomes. They want hard outcomes. How do we influence them? It's not just our decision on how we do that, which links into system change. So, but also how do we influence that idea about partnership working? It's easy to write it into a spec. We need to help that happen. We need to influence our providers to come together, so we can provide some of the framework to do that. So you might have it in your Fulfilling Lives projects, what we call the MARB, the Multi-Agency Review Board. We've taken that and developed that into something else, which we now call the MASP, the Multi-Agency Solutions Panel, which brings together a wide range of agencies to look at and try and find solutions and system change and all that sort of side of the stuff we've been talking about. It's new, it's only just started, but we're quite keen about that. And I guess finally, because I'm probably running out of time, is the importance of language, which I'll probably slip up loads of times today with, but it's a bit of a journey for me. How do we all change this, commissioners and providers? You know, is it need that we're addressing, or aspiration? You know, which I think is really important. And that's a bit of a journey. So even how we write our specifications, you know, we you know, a time limited pieces of work, but how do we get the language in that right? And who can help us with that? And, you know, how do we sort of co-produce a lot of that? So really briefly, that's what we've been doing in Leeds. We don't have all the answers. I'm definitely not here saying like we cracked it and we're brilliant. But we are on a bit of a change around this and trying to think how we can do things. And these are some of the things that we've done, and I'm sure we'll expand on that as we go through the day. That's me. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian, for that really thoughtful contribution. So I'm going to pass over to Lucy now.
Thanks, Suzy. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Holmes, and I just started as Creative Change Director at Groundswell. Before that, I was Director of Research and Policy at Alcohol Change UK. And before that, I worked at St Mungo's. I'm also a trustee of Streets to Homes, a small charity in Harlow, Essex. I've worked in the charity sector for about 15 years now, and many of those roles have been in research and evaluation. So that's the perspective I come from. Firstly, thank you so much for the invitation to join the panel, and to all the other speakers for really thought-provoking comments so far. And thank you also to everyone who's involved in developing this piece of work. It's really important and makes some very powerful arguments for changing the way we support people. Reading the report, I was struck by two things. Firstly, the rationale provided for changing the way we measure progress and outcomes. And second, some of the challenges and opportunities that would present. I'm particularly persuaded by the argument that reliance on hard outcome measures hides a huge amount of work that both clients and their support services have to do to get to that point. And our hard outcome measures fail to capture or recognise that, even though we know it's taking place. And those hard outcome measures can't cope with the up and down nature of people's lives. They can't account for how hard it is to rebuild your trust in a system that's failed you in the past. But achieving soft outcomes like trust or like motivation to change can take longer than a delivery contract or commissioning cycle, perhaps not in Leeds, to be fair. But if you're not monitoring those things throughout, then you might find yourself forced to make commissioning decisions without the full picture. And furthermore, I think we need to acknowledge that commissioning based only on hard outcome measures risks introducing a perverse incentive for providers to cherry pick the clients who are most likely to succeed, and to weed out those people who actually most need the support to achieve their goals. And all of this not to say there aren't challenges, and I can think of lots that I expect you would encounter in your own local systems. And Ian already mentioned dealing with procurement teams, those sorts of challenges definitely there. And I know that uncertainty around funding leads to unhelpfully short commissioning cycles. And often I know that's driven by central government funding allocations being very last minute or being short term. I would feel a bit more hopeful that we've had a slightly longer spending review last autumn, so I hope that helps a bit. And I know you'll face huge pressure to get quick results. While Steve's presentation highlighted, the relational outcomes are prerequisite for achieving hard outcomes, but they do take time to achieve. I have to say, I do hope that we can learn something from our experience over the last couple of years during the pandemic, and that we've seen lots of local areas allowing greater flexibility, extending contracts, and seeing that allowing for really creative and innovative and effective responses. So secondly, I'm sure that many people that you work with don't yet have faith in soft or relational outcomes as a measure of success, perhaps don't see them as objective or true. But I would counter that by asking, well, how sensible is it to place your faith in hard outcomes that actually mask reality, that don't acknowledge or ignore the nuance and complexity of people's lives? And thirdly, I acknowledge it's challenging because it requires patience and perseverance from commissioners and from providers. Identifying clients' goals with them is hard and it takes time to do. And it needs trust. We have to trust our clients to make decisions about their own goals, their own aspirations. We have to trust providers to find the right way to go about supporting those individuals. But implementing monitoring systems that can capture and recognise soft outcomes can be a really important way to demonstrate that trust. And as well as the challenges, I can also see a number of important opportunities. The chance to be creative and to work with clients to get this right. How fantastic. Like Ian said, if you can allow that flexibility and allow services to adapt, it brings huge benefits. And there's a chance also to get closer to the truth, both allowing you as commissioners to make improvements where necessary and to see the achievements that you and your commission services and their clients are achieving. And I think that can be hugely motivating. And measuring soft outcomes, especially if you can include some qualitative data capture methods, I would argue can uncover some otherwise unseen factors at play. So it's something you weren't looking for perhaps, but now you're able to act on. And I see that's a really important opportunity. So in summary, my kind of key points for success, I suggest, firstly, beware of creating perverse incentives with your reporting requirements, and just be mindful of the impact that frequent competitive tendering can have on joint working, on multi-agency working, on partnerships, and on delivering consistent support. Secondly, I'd recommend acting proportionately. The monitoring activity, the evaluation, the impact measurement mustn't outweigh the effort and resources put into delivery, otherwise it becomes burdensome and unhelpful. And finally, I echo Katy's earlier call for a change in mindset. We need to foster a culture of trust alongside accountability, but we need to rebuild our clients' trust in services and the system. We need to build trust for clients amongst the service providers, and we need to have trust in services as commissioners. Thank you all so much. I'm really looking forward to this morning's discussion. I'll cede the floor.
Thank you, Lucy, for that. So, and now pass you on to Helena. Thanks, Helena.
Hello, it's a pleasure being here, and I will just echo everybody's words. Now, from Fulfilling Lives perspective, and a little bit of my own, if I can add, I would like to start with the language we use and the soft outcomes. I would like us to start changing that, because they are not soft. They are the hardest ones to achieve, and they are the hardest ones to establish and to reinforce. So without these links of relations and these links of trust, the harder outcomes, as we put it, I sustain the tendency creating relationships in the community will not be actually achieved in the long run. So that's just kind of a little intro to our language. Now, in our experience, and over again, what was reinforced to us is that we don't really know anything about someone's journey, about someone's wantings and wishes for their life at the particular moment that we walk alongside them. So the first learning of practitioners, the first learning as human beings sitting in front of other human beings, is that we need to come almost naked of our judgments, naked of our assumptions, and especially naked of our expectations of someone's journey and recovery. So coming with this kind of empty attitude merely, we are relaying and allowing for the individual to be telling us how they want to drive this journey, what is important right now. So quite often we start the conversation, which can be quite immediate and quite scary, especially if you never processed your thoughts about it. What is important to you right now? What can I do to make it happen right now? We all read the tick box exercises, the 3,000 risk assessments, and the numerous referrals. But that tells me about Helena 30 years ago, 15 years ago. Who is Helena now? What does Helena want? Because by reading all of that, I would say, oh, Helena needs to go into, be referred to mental health services. Helena needs to be linked into detox. But this is me deciding what is good for Helena, or what my expectations are for Helena and Helena's recovery or well-being. Now, Helena might say from all of that, actually what is important is not to stop using, but to use in a safe way. And what's really important for her is to rekindle those relationships with people that were important for her in her life. So if we start with this principle of what is important to the individual, then we are completely changing the system. We are completely changing the paths that we are going to create. And we are listening, and we are taking on board what is important for them and to them. So the chances actually of success and hard outcomes achievement is higher. It's higher because you decided, you're the ones that wants it, not me. Not that I think that it's not important to actually look into other areas of it. Let's start with your rules. So moving on to this, it leads as well to the way we work, to the way that we relate to other providers. And the idea again that we are providers and we are here for the same purpose, make people's life better and happier. We are not competitors. We are not going to steal each other's tenders and contracts. And the commissioners need to be very aware of this as well, that for the local authority outcomes, then providers need to be in sync. Providers need to have the same road to go, the same outcomes as well. And when we talk about services that are designed and co-produced by the individuals, we are talking, yes, about flexibility within services, smaller caseloads to practitioners. We are talking about money as well, and obviously these figures are important, but we are talking about quick gains and savings on the short term, not on the long term. Actually, it's not achievable sustainability of actually someone's journey and someone's life if we are just looking for quick fix and quick gains. Yes, the hard outcomes might say that we had 5 people going into rehab, which is a fantastic outcome, but was it successful? Was the aftercare part of? Was the continuation of that journey within the community, which the relational links need to be there? Because when we talk about aftercare, it's not the idea of having services linked to that person for the rest of their life, but the aftercare is actually within the community that they are going to live in, within the community that they are going to be part of. That's what makes people feel belonging, and that's what makes us create roots, isn't it? And feel accepted as well. And going to this of having the trust within the staff team, having the trust into services again, it goes all around and makes me consider, or makes us look as well to our workforce, isn't it? To the staff, to the resilience of the staff, to the, not the dedication, because that's always there, but actually how do we develop a workforce that just goes for it, just has free spirit as well to support the people we work with. And this is a core pillar of system change and of changing outcomes as well, is the development of staff. So we are very, very strong believers that we need as much nurturing the staff as we nurture the people we support. Also,
sorry to interrupt. Helena, just conscious of time, I just think we might cover some of these points as well. I just want a chance for Sarah to speak, and also we've only got 20 minutes left, if that's okay, and I'm sure some people have got their own questions, but if you could keep that point and we'll come back to it. So Sarah, I'd like to invite you to talk for 5 minutes about your experience, professional experience, and also your experience of accessing services as well. Thank you.
Cool, thank you, Suzy. Great to be here today. So for me, like I have experience of multiple disadvantage. I've experienced homelessness. I'm a care leaver. I have a mental health diagnosis, but also I've worked in services within the system, like leaving care services, supported housing, and also as a youth worker as well. So I've got sort of that perspective from both sides of the coin, if you like, as well. Like in many of my previous roles, you know, it was very, you know, the agenda and the goals were led by the service, and the outcomes were like unrealistic and unachievable by the actual client group, which I kind of felt it was setting people up to fail, and it was further disadvantaging them as well, because a lot of times if they weren't meeting those goals, you'd say, oh, they're not engaging, but they were engaging. They just couldn't get to the actual goal. And it caused as well like massive friction, because I'm trying to push my agenda, what I need for my job on these young people and stuff, which really did affect the relationship and the ability to build trust. Like back when I was in the leaving care team, it was so much, you know, coming up with leaving care plans, support plans, risk assessments. So much of that time, which should have been for support, was writing reports, paperwork, stuff like that. It really took away from the support that they needed, and it left very little space actually to address what they wanted for their lives. And it was corporate parenting. It should have been, you know, very much led by them rather than imposed by the system or me or whoever was working with them. For me, I just felt like, you know, I'd got into that sort of work because I wanted to help. I wanted things to change. You know, I've been a care leaver myself. I've gone through a lot of difficulties, leaving care, homelessness, stuff like that. And so I wanted to like change things for people, make things better. And it was really frustrating for me to just have my hands tied so badly in terms of the support that I could actually offer. It wasn't person-centered. It was literally so militant in what could be done, what couldn't be done in terms of funding, in terms of everything really. So that just caused like massive frustration for me and for other people. You know, you go through a lot of vicarious trauma listening to people and their stories, and you know, there wasn't a lot of support in place at that time either. And there was like a very high staff turnover. So, you know, you might like me as well, like when I was in care, you might have another worker, like throughout a year, you might have 3 different social workers. And it was the same when I joined the leaving care team as well, because the lack of support and the lack of working in a person-centered way, you know, people just left. They didn't wanna, they couldn't do it. So I'm just going to read through like a quote from the research that we did as well, which sort of echoes what I'm saying. So this person, they said, I went through a long period that I was passed from one worker to another, constantly having to restart a relationship and go through traumatic memories. The new workers just picked up on the previous workers' info and made their own minds up from that. So yeah, having to go through your history, having to go through your trauma again and again, it really affects people's ability to like engage with services. And it's like you need to build that long-term lasting relationship as well to really share your experiences and really share your goals and move on from your trauma as well. As well, like I felt like in that role as a leaving care worker, I was forcing people to make changes at times that weren't right for them. Because that's what I had to do, and that's what the outcome was. It had to be done within a certain time frame. And again, that felt really sort of wrong, to be honest. If you know that isn't the right time and place for the person, considering everything else in the person's life, to have to sort of push that, yeah, it was really, really difficult. You know, we need to like judge outcomes that are actually realistic and ask for clients' consent and ask for their input. Otherwise, how are we really supporting them? We're just pushing what we need on them. And I understand like commissioning is very difficult. We need outcomes, but oh, Suzy gave me a wave there. Oh, you weren't, sorry.
I was writing down some things that you were saying.
I thought it was a wave.
You've got another minute, Sarah.
Okay, cool. But also, yeah, we should be encouraging service users to like set their own goals, set their own agendas. You know, it's up to them, it's their lives, it's what they want out of it. But also from a commissioning point of view, to work in a person-centered way, you need time and resources and backing and support as well, because it's difficult for staff members as well. It's not an easy job, it's not an easy role. And so it's about supporting the workers, it's about supporting the service users as well, and realizing that, you know, these small steps, without building confidence, without building self-esteem, you know, people can't get to the harder outcomes. You know, if they've gone through massive trauma, if they've experienced multiple disadvantage for a long period of time, those smaller steps are even more important than the harder outcomes, I would say, because that's what leads to it. And one doesn't come without the other. So how long have I got left, Suzy?
I think that's perfectly ended.
Okay.
There's a few. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for those offerings. There's definitely some kind of phrases that I'm going to use going forward. A compassionate city, a culture of trust, expectations and goals and agenda. Those are some words that I'm going to think about. So I've got a question for you all, but I've also there's some questions coming through, hopefully in the chat, and people can continue to pop them in there. But my first question is, why aren't services using person-led and person-centered approaches more often? What are the barriers? Anybody want to take that one?
I think it's the outcomes, isn't it? And I think a lot of people that go into health and social care work, they do want to work in a person-centered way, but then they find themselves unable to because of the organisational agenda or the commissioning process, which can be really difficult. So yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone want to add to that? Lucy?
There's an element that I got to flip down the head. You're implying that things aren't person-centered. And I think in a lot of cases they are. So there's, you know, I think there's an element of looking at where the good practice is and then trying to share and spread that. Because I think if we come from a position of saying, you know, everything's not person-centered, I personally don't think that's the case. I think an awful lot of work is person-centered. And it's a question of then how we can sustain that, how we can show that that's the right way of going about things. How does that help us? You know, I'm trying to get rid of the word outcomes here in this conversation a little bit, but at the end of the day, sitting where I'm sat, you know, we have to show that what we're doing has some impact, whatever that is. And I think the conversations need to be around how do we show that, and there's lots of different ways of doing that, isn't there? Some of it's hard, some of it's soft. But I take Helena's point that the soft stuff's actually the hardest stuff to do. You know, but I think that I'm waffling a little bit, but I think there's an awful lot of very good person-centered work going on. The question is, how do we sustain that? And time and money comes into that quite a bit.
Suzy, just very quickly, I agree with Ian completely. There is a lot of good work going on. I think one of the key barriers, you know, is around changing cultures, changing sort of overall philosophies to being sort of non-judgmental, non-conditional. Building in those aspects of service delivery is really, really important to work in way, and that's, I think, that it's those qualities that we look for in sort of good and better practice.
Yeah,
Can I make a really quick comment, Suzy, on system change, which I think Steve's alluding to there, which is really important and has been talked a lot about in terms of the Fulfilling Lives work. And I've said this in other forums, but systems are made of people. So it's people we're trying to change to a certain extent, not systems, you know. So I sit in a system, you know, I'm on a journey of change and how we go around this. How do I influence other people around me and all of that side of things? So, you know, systems are made of people. So I think it's easy to look at a system and say, well, it's that beast over there. But who are the people sitting in that beast? You know, how do we all work? You know, that for me is more important. The systems will change if the people change.
Quick one on that one, Ian. Actually, I've got on my notes, my final kind of food for thought and comment would be, what is and who is the system? We are, you are. So the change needs to start with us. Because we do talk about the system as that entity there, you know, it's all to blame the system, but we are the system.
Absolutely. Thank you, Helena. We've got a question here from Gary, which says, how can we determine how someone should live just because of their circumstances? There wasn't a question mark at the end of the question, so it could be, it's a great statement, but it could also be potentially a question because it starts with how. So I'm wondering if the panel want to speak to that. How can we determine how someone should live just because of their circumstances?
Well, we shouldn't, should we? We shouldn't determine how someone lives based on their circumstances. It should be up to them to decide how they live, and what they need and what their needs are and what they want to achieve from life. It's not really for us to put our beliefs and our wishes and what we think, our morals and other people. It should always come from the person, surely.
Thanks, Sarah. Does anyone want to add to that point? We'll move on. Sorry.
I totally and utterly agree with everything Sarah's saying then, but I'll just like flip going back to our systems conversation, you know, which is made of people. You know, where I sit, the issue sometimes is around perceptions, and it's around the political environment in which I work, and you know, I can't ever get away from that. You know, I work in a field where, you know, the money we get, everything that the outcomes we're setting, a lot of that is driven by a political environment who might have some of those people might take a view that is misguided, shall we say. So there's an element about our role is as individuals within the system, how do we influence and educate upwards as well, so that the wider people around us can understand exactly what you're saying, Sarah, about that. Can
I just add, there's something else that makes systems, isn't it, as well as the people within them, and that is the structures, the processes, the procedures, the written down bits and bobs that go around it, and things like how much we get paid, what our employment contracts look like, and some of those things have a significant impact on the way people are able to deliver their work. I'm thinking particularly of staff in delivery agencies now, but their resilience, their sense of security in their own job, the support they get within their employment structure. Do they get good clinical supervision? Do they get very good training and development themselves? Where systems become very lean, and some of that might be, as Ian points out, a political decision to make a system quite lean, that we might be creating some structural barriers that prevent people from delivering the kind of work they want to deliver, from doing the kind of person-centered support that they want to do. Sarah, said earlier about the staff members feeling that their hands are tied. You can feel that way for lots of different reasons. One might be outcome monitoring that you're required to do. One might be the way that your job is structured, the way that you're paid, the way you get two people between providers. And so I think there's something, yes, we can all change ourselves, we can all try to work from a values-based place and model that for other people, but we also need to look at changing some of the structures that we ask people to work within to allow them the freedom to do their jobs to the best of their abilities, and pay people more, preferably, to attract the best and the brightest.
Thank you, Lucy. So I've got quite a few questions. I'm looking at the time, and I don't think we'll have a chance to do them all, but I'm going to try and pick the ones that I feel that kind of cover some different areas. So we've got a question here from the audience that says, Lucy mentioned competitive tendering can undermine attempts to build better partnerships. Does the panel have any thoughts on how tendering processes can be adapted to help people work more collaboratively?
Guess that's probably going to have to be try to take that, isn't it? Well, I think firstly that we need an honesty that there is a competitive process in play. You know, at the minute things might change, but at the minute that's the ball game that we're in. From our point of view in Leeds, one of the things we've done, as I mentioned at the start, is to try to put much longer contracts in place, so that once that, you know, so we'll have our bun fight, and then after the bun fight, we've got a long period of time to sit down and try and work, you know, see how we're going to work. But there is an absolute expectation where I am that, you know, we've got competitors within that marketplace, for using that terminology, who will be absolutely expected to work together, you know, with the best interests of the client there once the bum fight is done. And I think we're pretty good at that, and we can get a role in that by bringing people together. So there's a short period where there might be some competition, but the wider framework of that is that we are trying to deliver for the people of Leeds, and everyone's got a role to play in that.
Does anyone to add to that? Thank you, Ian, for that.
Might I just make a quick point, which is that I think there's something that we can really helpfully think about, which is where commissioning cycles fit alongside one another. So where is your commissioning cycle for your homelessness service compared to your commissioning cycle for your CAM service or your drug and alcohol service? Because as well as not wanting the homelessness providers all having a bun fight over who gets to do outreach, it can be very disruptive for partnership working across the whole system when your drug and alcohol service is on a quicker funding cycle, or is just being contracted halfway through and it disrupts everything. So it's worth taking a zoomed out approach as well as thinking about each individual service specification and what's being tendered when.
Yeah, agree with that, Lucy. We do try and do a bit of that, but we've got, you know, there's conversations, for example, with CCG, which is a different funding cycle, about how we can look at some of that. The flip side, of course, is we don't want everything happening at the same time, because we couldn't manage it either.
It's really tricky, and I do hope that the integrated care systems coming in the healthcare system will help with some of this and linking up better. But it's very difficult, I know. I think commissioners have an interesting role to play in thinking on what basis providers are competing. I've noticed that one of the things that process can do is that providers won't share the way that they measure their own impact. So one provider might hit upon a brilliant set of outcome measures, but they don't want to tell anyone else that, because that's their commercial interest, to keep it proprietary. So I think there's some clever thinking to be done about what you're asking people to compete on, not just a race to the bottom for price, and not keeping innovative good practice developments to themselves for fear of them being stolen.
I think we've got a few.
Don't start me on the price issue. I've got a lot of views on that. Our procurement colleagues aren't here.
We've got a few minutes left, and we've got quite a big question. I may be very foolish in asking a big question, but we've not got much time left. But I think it's a very good question, or an interesting question. Somebody has asked, are we saying that it's okay for people to make bad choices?
No. Of course we're not, but you've got to understand, when people have experienced multiple disadvantage, sometimes they have very few options. They wouldn't have the same choices, the same advantages. You know, for me as a care leaver, you know, I didn't have the family backing, I didn't have that support network. So that left me at a disadvantage, like, throughout all my adult life. So it's not, you know, when people have gone through trauma, when people have had very difficult childhoods, adolescence, adulthoods, they might make bad choices by your standards, but by their standards, that might seem like a reasonable choice. If you can't get a job, if you are living in poverty, if you need to feed your family, then you might make what you would consider bad choices, but that might be survival to that person. So it's wrong to put assumptions of right and wrong choices if you don't understand that situation. Does that make sense?
Very good sense. Thank you, Sarah. That's such brilliant your point there that you've made, and I think it's a really good one to end on, actually. So I'm going to hand over back to, I'm just conscious of the time, back to Katy, who's going to wrap up for us. But just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for preparing something to say on this topic today, and yeah, some of the questions that the audience have asked, and your really thoughtful answers. You definitely given me some food for thought, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzy, Steve, Helena, Ian, Sarah and Lucy, for presenting, sharing your wisdom and your ideas. It was really a wonderful session, and I was sitting there with my camera off and my mic off, and it was really hard not to jump in and get involved in the conversation. Just so much food for thought and so much interesting discussion. So really, thank you very much. And huge thank yous to everyone for attending. It's been great to have you here. We've appreciated your participation, contributions, questions, and I hope you've all enjoyed yourselves. So Fulfilling Lives is in its final year of our 8-year funded programme. And a big part of this final phase is about sharing our learning, which we'll do via reports and shared learning events just like this one. We continue to work within the boroughs of Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham, and at a national level to influence practice and policy. So please follow us for updates on opportunities to connect with us and learn from the outputs and the research and learning partnership and wider Fulfilling Lives work. On the 15th of February, we have a workshop session exploring some of today's content in a bit more depth, which you will all have received an email about yesterday. You can sign up to that event via Eventbrite, and there should be a link in the chat at the moment. And through the next 5 months, we'll have a range of further events, so do please keep an eye on our Twitter website and sign up to our mailing list for more info. Our website has loads of resources, reports and information, and links to the national evaluation too, so please look out for those. We'll also be dropping links to blogs and publications in the chat. Finally, please do support us by completing the online feedback form, which is also in the chat. It should only take you about 5 minutes to do, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you once again to our amazing panelists and all of you in the audience, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.